이 소리는 르 메르디앙 호텔 TV CNN방송을 소리입니다.
That do occur at the individual scale. In the case of ozone depletion, it was spray cans and old leaky refrigerators, refrigerators that used chlorofluorocarbons or freons, these chemicals that ultimately get into the stratosphere and destroy it. So it was individual behavior that was putting those chemicals into the atmosphere, and yet what we saw was that a market-oriented program to place incentives that move industry away from using those ozone-depleting chemicals ultimately did lead to the solution of the problem. We've seen massive recovery now of the ozone hole around Antarctica because of those systemic changes that ultimately simply provided better choices to individuals and consumers, choices that don't damage the planet.
I think that's really an optimistic and an important reminder that actually these things can work and can work in a way that's not just beneficial to the planet, but beneficial to individuals as well and doesn't cost them much. Here is what, though, on the plant and food and land issue that we're talking about, particularly with this report, the director James Cameron and his wife told me a while ago.
What you're putting on your plate actually makes a huge difference towards not only climate change, but your health as well.
And I guess
the health of the planet.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just the health of the planet. I mean, the quickest and easiest way for an individual to feel empowered and to make a difference and to be able to look at their face in the mirror in the morning and think, I'm making a difference, I'm doing something positive, not just for myself, my own health and my family's health, but for the health of the planet, is to change how we eat.
So again, how does one shift populations? But you sort of indicated. Interestingly, in the report that we heard from Bill Weir, the farmers say that the harsher the climate gets, the worse it is for them and for their land and for their ability to make it economically. So just wondering, we've had the hottest July on record here in Europe. You've got wildfires, a massive amount in Siberia. Even President Putin is talking about having to direct, the state towards figuring out what to do. But of course, their economy kind of depends on fossil fuels. And so I guess how long do you think we have, and how, the ship of state, it says, is so difficult to turn around. How much effort and time is it going to take to just deal with the land issue?
Yeah, and it's important to realize that while there are economies that still rely on fossil fuels, the health of the planet relies on us getting off fossil fuels. And that's, of course, of far greater importance. We won't have an economy to talk about if we don't have a livable planet. James Cameron makes some important points here. One of, there is agency. There are things that we can do in our everyday lives that do help solve this problem. And by the way, they put us on a path. As we engage in these actions, we become more invested in solving this problem and more likely to participate in collective efforts, putting pressure on policymakers, doing all those other things we can do to make sure that there is the systemic change that we need, that moves us away from fossil fuels, that moves us away from a carbon-intensive food system. There are all of these things that we can do in our everyday lives, and changing your diet is one of the simplest things to do. I've chosen to not eat meat for a number of reasons, and I feel good about that choice. I feel healthier for having made that choice, but I don't want to mandate other people's choices. What I want to do is to provide them with the information necessary for them to make informed choices about their own individual actions, and more importantly, to get them on that path of engagement where they participate in the broader collective action necessary for this dramatic systemic change that we need, by the way, as you allude to, over really just a decade. We need to bring those carbon emissions down by a factor of 50% and then down to near zero, 50% by 2030 and near zero by 2050 if we are to avert the most catastrophic impacts of climate change.
Okay.
A bit of good news there. The preliminary numbers are in for 2019. Obviously, 2019 isn't finished yet, and there are lots of things that can happen. But based on the preliminary numbers, we're seeing a significant drop of more than 1% in carbon emissions this year. Another hint that maybe we're starting to bend that curve downward, and we need to bend it down rapidly. But the first step is to bring those emissions to a plateau and start that decline.
That's great.
Towards 2030 and 2050, where we need to be.
That is very, very good news. And particularly what you say, individuals can make a difference. And we're obviously seeing it amongst young people who put this issue of climate and the environment at the very top of their political agenda. Michael Mann, thank you very much indeed. Now, from one existential threat to the next, we look to the heating tensions between two major U.S. allies and nuclear-armed nations, India and Pakistan. It all kicked off on Monday when the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced that he was removing Kashmir's special status from the Indian constitution, putting its autonomy in peril. In an address to the nation today, the Indian Prime Minister doubled down, saying that his actions would free Kashmir of terrorism. In a nutshell, Kashmir is a contentious piece of land split mostly between India and Pakistan, and they have fought 3 wars over it already. The Pakistani government is responding so far by suspending trade with its neighbor and downgrading diplomatic relations. As this tense standoff develops, we have asked for Indian officials to join us, but they've so far declined. And I'm joined now by Pakistan's ambassador to the United Nations, Maliha Lodi. Ambassador Lodi, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
How serious is this in the view of your government? And I don't just mean politically for your government, but regionally, and what might it do given the tension between your two nations?
Christian, let's first get the facts straight. How was this crisis triggered? It was triggered by an illegal annexation by the Indian government of the state of Jammu and Kashmir, which is an internationally recognized dispute. In fact, where I sit at the United Nations, it is a dispute that is firmly on the UN Security Council agenda because there are a series of UN Security Council resolutions that have called on India to allow the people of Jammu and Kashmir to freely determine their destiny through a plebiscite. So the crisis is triggered by an illegal and an illegitimate action by India. And let's just get the rest of the facts straight. The facts are that there is a blanket curfew in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. People there are locked up. It's called a lockdown, which has entered its 4th day. But actually, this has been a prolonged lockdown. These people have been deprived of their liberty for 70 years or more. Now they're going to be deprived of their identity because the action by the Indian government, what does it actually do? What it does is to also allow the Indian government to bring about demographic changes in Jammu and Kashmir, and therefore to really threaten the identity of the Kashmiri people. As far as my government is concerned and my Prime Minister and my country is concerned, we reject this move. We heard what Prime Minister Modi said just a few hours ago, and it was a dishonest, deceitful, and disingenuous justification of their action, which has no basis in law. And it certainly flouts, in flagrant violation, Security Council resolution.
Okay, so Ambassador, let me ask you then. Let me ask you, because those are very, very, tough words that you're using. You are the UN ambassador. You've just reminded us all how this is enshrined in international law, given the dispute that should be resolved according to the international community. So what is the United Nations and the Security Council going to do about this? Are they taking it up?
Well, I have been in meetings with top UN officials, and I have reminded them of their responsibility. Pakistan is going to go to the Security Council. It is going to remind the Security Council and its members, indeed all of the United Nations, of its responsibility. And what is that responsibility? That responsibility is to ensure, and let me cite here, Christian, for your viewers, an important resolution. It's called Resolution 38 of the Security Council. And the paragraph 2 of that resolution says, a country does not have the right to materially change the situation in Jammu and Kashmir. And that's precisely what the Indian government has done. So my country wants a peaceful settlement of this issue. We've always called for a negotiated settlement, which is in accordance with Security Council resolutions and in accordance with the wishes of the Kashmiri people. let's not forget, the issue is about people. It's about a people who have been deprived of their right to live the way they want to be governed the way they want to. And today, even pro-Indian politicians in Jammu and Kashmir have been locked up. So if Prime Minister Narendra Modi says that this is in the interest of the Jammu and Kashmir people, the question he has to answer is, why do you have to lock up the entire state of Jammu and Kashmir? You know why? Because no Kashmiri will accept what the Indian government has done.
So we
don't accept what the Indian government has done. We reject it, and we'll go to the council and we'll make all these points at the council, and we will insist that the council implement its own resolutions. Because I think the choice right now is, do we want to live in a rules-based world where international law is supreme, or do we want to live in a world which is ruled by the law of the jungle? And this is what India has done. It has flouted international law, and it has flouted Security Council resolutions.
You mentioned lockdown and lock up. I mean, we've heard reports that opposition politicians in Jammu Kashmir have been arrested. And as you say, landlines are down, the internet is down, mobile phone is down. Very, very difficult to get an idea of exactly what's happening on the ground there. But I do want to ask you, because the whole world knows that this piece of disputed land has been the cause of 3 wars between your nations. And today, your army chief, the Pakistani army chief, said that the country would do all that's necessary, go to any extent to support Kashmiris. And then the foreign minister said that Pakistan is not looking to respond militarily. So can I hear it from you? Do you think that there's going to be a military solution to this, or do you still have diplomatic intentions?
No, I mean, we have said very clearly that all diplomatic and political options are on the table. Pakistan has no interest and no desire to escalate the situation. This is an escalation that was triggered by an illegal and illegitimate act, and we would like the international community now to stand up for principle, for law, for justice, and to address the plight of the Kashmiri people. As I keep saying, Christian, this is about people in that state, in an occupied state, in an occupation that has been brutal. India has moved additional troops into occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Why? Obviously, to suppress the voice of the Kashmiri people. But one day, the curfew will have to end. One day, these restrictions will have to go. And then the Indian government will hear the voice of the Kashmiri people, and that voice will be to get out of Kashmir, to leave Kashmir, and to reverse this illegal annexation.
Well, that's also, gives rise to all sorts of worries, because if they do protest, as most people believe they will, and some have suggested they will, if and when this curfew is raised, that also could trigger a response. So let me ask you, because obviously President Trump has met Prime Minister Modi of India several times, and he also just hosted Prime Minister Imran Khan, your Prime Minister, at the White House. And when they were talking, President Trump said that Prime Minister Modi had mentioned maybe mediating in this. Let me just play what President Trump said.
I was with Prime Minister Modi 2 weeks ago, and we talked about this subject. And he actually said, would you like to be a mediator or arbitrator? I said, where? He said, Kashmir, because this has been going on for many, many years. I was surprised at how long it's been going on along.
70 years.
I think they'd like to see it resolved, and I think you'd like to see it resolved. And if I can help, I would love to be a mediator.
So my question to you is, what is the Prime Minister, Imran Khan's, reaction to an offer by President Trump? Is it a real offer? Would you welcome that?
Well, Prime Minister Imran Khan has already tweeted, in fact, immediately after this crisis began with the Indian action, that it is time that President Trump now makes good on this offer, that he welcomes this offer, and Pakistan has always been open to mediation. Look, Pakistan has stood for peace. Pakistan has stood for a negotiated settlement. We would like to address the plight of the Kashmiri people, and we don't think that the plight of the Kashmiri people is addressed by these unilateral measures where they are locked up, where everything is taken away from them, and then the argument is made that this is being done in their interest. I think that is laughable, it's ridiculous, it's absurd, and it would really be laughable if it wasn't such a serious matter. But the Indian narrative right now and their justification is really, it just doesn't wash. The people of Kashmir want to run their own life in a way that is acceptable to them. And that is what Security Council resolutions call for. So this ultimately is a question of principle, of law, of morality and justice for a people who for 70 years have lived in darkness.
Why do you think, I mean, you've been following this very closely, you've been a diplomat for your country for many, many years. Why do you think this move has happened now? There are some who believe that it's one of the first, it's like fulfilling a campaign promise. That's what Prime Minister Modi said he'd do the first time around. He said he'd bring an economic miracle to India and he'd, you know, take back Kashmir. Why do you think he's doing this now?
Well, I think, Christian, timing is something that only the Indian government can answer for you. But certainly my Prime Minister, in an address that he made to Parliament, made it very clear that he saw, and we do see this action by the Indian government to be very much part of the BJP's ideology under Prime Minister Modi, which is to impose Hindu rule over all of India and to take away whatever, you know, dimensions of secularism that ever existed in India. And in Jammu and Kashmir, this is very much part of an ideology which seeks to turn a Muslim majority state into one where Kashmiris are turned into a minority ultimately because of the demographic changes that India wants to bring in Jammu and Kashmir. So I think it is being determined by an ideology which is fascist, which is racist, and which rests on the supremacy of one faith over others. And this is most unfortunate. We again condemn this, and we ask that India return to the negotiating table, that it rescinds these steps, because it will find that there will not be a single Kashmiri that will ever accept what India has done.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, as I've said, and I'll say it again, we've tried to get reaction to this so that we can ask the Indian officials precisely why they're doing this right now. And we'll continue to try to get their response to this really important move. But of course, India over many years has accused Pakistan of destabilizing moves, has accused Pakistan of fueling terrorism, has accused, Kashmir of being used as a hotbed for Pakistani activity in that regard. And now the Indian Defense Minister says that the new status, that they're now calling it a new status, would end the discrimination faced by the people of Kashmir over the past 70 years. How do you answer their accusations to your government?
Well, I think they need to first answer to themselves what they have done to Jammu and Kashmir. Why has there been resistance for 70 years? Why has there been a freedom struggle? I mean, they focus on one aspect of what has been happening in Jammu and Kashmir. But the question that they have to answer is, why is it that they have failed to win Kashmiri hearts and minds? And the reason for that is very simple. No nation, no people, no one accepts foreign occupation. And that is how every Kashmiri sees India's presence. They have over 500,000 troops in Jammu and Kashmir. Why? What are they doing there? And why can't they, through 500,000 plus troops, ensure security in Jammu and Kashmir? So I think these disingenuous ways of trying to change the subject, change the narrative, is not going to work. What has happened in Jammu and Kashmir is there for the whole world to see. India has acted in blatant violation of law, and India needs to return not just to the negotiating table with Pakistan and to talk about a peaceful settlement, which is based on Security Council resolutions. India needs to also come to the Security Council and answer why it has failed to implement Security Council resolutions which call for a free and open plebiscite for the people of Kashmir.
Talking about a free and open plebiscite for Kashmir, let's just move on to Afghanistan, which is on your other border, and where, as you know, the Taliban is engaged in so-called peace talks with the United States and have said that, potentially in 2 weeks or a couple of weeks, they might be ready to announce the parameters of a peace deal. This is incredibly important for the region, for your government, for the government of Afghanistan, for the United States, which has troops there. What is the status of those talks as far as you know? And does this move complicate it in any way at all?
Let me take the second half of your question first, Christian. Of course, the two issues are completely distinct, separate. One has nothing to do with the other. Kashmir is different, Afghanistan is different. But at the same time, India's move and the timing of this move raises the question whether it has done this also to destabilize the promising peace process in Afghanistan, because it is obviously not in India's interest to see peace return to Afghanistan. So that is a question for them to answer, why they have moved at a time when clearly such a move has a destabilizing impact on the entire region, because the region is on edge right now. The Kashmiri people are on edge. As for the peace talks in Afghanistan, we of course have always maintained for the last 18, 19 years that the only path to peace in Afghanistan was through a negotiated settlement. And we are pleased to see that these talks are progressing extremely well. And of course, if there's a country that has more to benefit from peace in Afghanistan other than Afghanistan itself, it is Pakistan. So we welcome this, and we hope that this will continue to make the progress so that we see peace, at least on the western side of our border. But India needs to answer this question. Why now?
Ambassador Maliha Lodi, thank you very much. And we still hope to ask the Indian government, why now? Now, whether in politics or science or any other field, one thing is for sure, we need more women now. From Thelma and Louise to A League of Their Own, the Oscar-winning actress Geena Davis made her name with her strong female characters. But it didn't take her long to realize that she was the exception and not the rule. She started her own organization, the Geena Davis Institute on Gender in Media, to keep track of the imbalance. Now, with director Tom Donahue, she's taking her message to the masses with the film This Changes Everything, which they've been discussing with our Michelle Martin.
Geena Davis, Tom Donahue, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
The title of the film, could we start with that? This Changes Everything. This is something that you say in the film. So, Geena, will you just tell us what the title is referring to?
Right. Well, it's meant a little ironically. What happened was when I was in Thelma and Louise, after Thelma and Louise came out, a lot of the press was talking about this is going to change everything. Now there's going to be so many more movies with women starring and everything, and I'm like, yay, I can't wait. Didn't seem to happen. And then, maybe 5 years later, another movie comes out with a female star. Well, now this changes everything. And it hasn't changed in all that time. The numbers have absolutely not improved for decades.
Every person that I've spoken with who's seen the film is just shocked by it, and they just can't believe that it is what it is.
You can't deny the problem after seeing the film.
Yeah. Well, talk a little bit about what the problem is, if you would.
Sure. Well, we called the film This Changes Everything because it's about kind of why that doesn't happen. Why don't things change? When, for instance, in 2017, I think, female-led films made 38% more money at the box office than male-led films. And a lot of men would say to me when I was making the film, well, the problem is you just follow the money. If women's films made more money, of course there would be more women's films. That's the problem. And women's films do make more money and have, I think, over the last 3 years.
Let me just give some of the statistics that you cite in the film. You say in almost 100 years, only one woman has won an Academy Award for Best Director. Of the top 100 grossing films of 2017, male lead characters received twice as much screen time as female leads. In 2018, 92% of the directors of the top 250 domestic releases were men. And this is according to the Center for the Study of Women in Television and Film at San Diego State University. So Geena, I think some people might hear that and go, oh, that's too bad, but why? Bring me my tiny violin. Like, why do I care?
Oh,
so why do we care?
No, we can't. No one can look at it that way.
Oh, they can.
Well, they will. They do, and this is in every sector of society is the same story. It's just very elevated because it's in the entertainment world, but we're not hearing women's voices or seeing the stories told through the female gaze, when there's so few female directors, profoundly, embarrassingly few, and then on screen really is impactful because as much as it can create a negative impact, it has the power to create incredibly positive changes. Like we're talking in the movie about the CSI effect, where there were so many shows, so many female forensic scientists on TV that women are now dominating that field because they just saw it on TV.
In fact, there's a clip in the film where you talk about the fact that representation actually in entertainment can actually matter in the real world. So let me just play that clip. Here it is.
Get back! That's my mother!
Images are so powerful that it will impact real life. In 2012, my archery coach noticed that when both Brave and The Hunger Games came out, suddenly the percentage of girls taking up archery shot up 105%, higher than adult men.
I think it was Maya Angelou who said you can't be what you can't see.
Right.
And you're saying that entertainment really does matter. Tom, you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I started making this movie. Originally, it was about workplace discrimination in Hollywood, but I thought to myself, who's going to want to see this movie outside of the people in Hollywood? So that's when I learned about the work of Geena and her institute and how important on-screen representation was.
Talk to me about the Geena Davis Institute, which you founded, years ago. And you say in the film that you were watching something with your daughter.
Right.
Why do you think that was the click moment for you?
I think I noticed it because I'd been in like Thelma and Louise and League of Their Own, and I became very aware of how few inspirational female characters there are, in regular adult fare. And but I had no idea. I just assumed kids' media would be gender balanced and wholesome and good for you and all that. And I was horrified. From the first thing I showed her, there were profoundly more male characters than female. And it was aimed at 2-year-olds. And so I thought, this is an enormous problem. If we're training kids from the beginning that girls are second-class citizens, what are we doing? This is the 21st century. We should be showing kids that boys and girls share the sandbox equally. So it was so horrifying to me that we'd be doing this to kids that I decided I had to try to do something.
Did you think it was as bad as it is?
Yeah, well, I started the film a year before, actually. I asked Geena to come on board. So I did. It really started for me at the end of 2014 with the Sony hack and finding out about the disparity in pay between Jennifer Lawrence and Bradley Cooper in American Hustle.
It's our time to have wage equality once and for all.
And then Patricia Arquette got up at the Oscars and demanded equal pay. So it was already a conversation that started to happen when I started developing the film with my producing partner.
Why is a dude making this film about women in Hollywood and the underrepresentation of women in Hollywood?
It's funny, I was a feminist since I was 10 years old because I came from a very right-wing family, but it was television that showed me there was another way. And it was a show called MASH, and this guy on the show named Alan Alda, who I would learn everything about. And I learned that he called himself a feminist. And for me, the word feminist was a bad word in my house. So here was my hero calling himself a feminist. So I learned through him about the Equal Rights Amendment, about Gloria Steinem and Marlo Thomas and that girl, and I became a fan of Mary Tyler Moore. So I learned about being a feminist through the activism of a man. And for me, it was no big deal to want to take the mantle here and to try to tell this story. I felt it was my duty as a feminist, male or otherwise. And hopefully young boys will see that a male directed this and think, I can do that too. I should do that too.
And you do make a point of saying in the film that 75% of the crew are women. And why does that matter? Like, I think a lot of people have become familiar with the whole question of representation on screen. So why does the behind the camera representation matter so much?
First of all, for the simple fact of fairness, that women deserve to be in half of the positions, and have leadership roles, and also be the grip and be on the crew and, use their talents. Film schools are now half female, and you wouldn't know it because of how it turns out 4% in post school. So there's something really deep and systemic going on.
But also, Reese Witherspoon says in the film that sometimes she would go on set and there would be 150 men and she would be the only woman. So that's why when it says 75% women made this film, people actually clap at that line at the end.
To that point, here's a scene from the film that speaks to that with Kimberly Pierce, the director, and Chloe Grace Moretz. Here it is.
When I was 15, I did Carrie. That movie was directed by Kim Pierce, who was my first female director, but it was a massively male crew. I was being talked to and treated and questioned
constantly and differently.
The biggest part of the movie is when she gets her period for the first time in the shower, and she doesn't know that it's her period because she had never been taught that from her mother. To have these conversations with men who were saying like, well, I don't think you should depict it that way, and I think you should depict it this way, and Kim and I sitting there going like, well, respectfully, I don't think you know what you're talking about. That was just the first time where I was ever like, I guess men don't see us women equal in this industry.
How is that possible?
Crazy story.
But Geena, this has to have happened to you throughout your career. Sure. Why hasn't it changed before now?
You know, I think partly, back when I started, I wasn't thinking about that even. I wasn't thinking this is so unfair. It was just like the way it was. And you know, being sexy and all that kind of stuff. And you know, being harassed and, you know, all kinds of things going on, being not listened to, talked down to, all of that stuff. But as time went on and I, you know, became more empowered, I started really noticing. And I think that's, but also part of it is that my peers and I felt like you cannot complain about any of this because they won't hire you. They'll just get somebody else. You know, we were made to feel very dispensable. You don't get much less salary because you guys don't really matter, and we'll replace you if you have any complaints. So, and it wasn't really until after Me Too and all that happened that we all realized this is different now. We can talk about it, and everybody is talking about it, you know.
You make the connection in the film that it's not just about, you know, the job, it's the conditions at the job, that it is directly connected to these vicious examples of sexual harassment and abuse that women have experienced that have now come to the fore. What is the connection? Can you talk about that?
Sure. When you have 150 men on set and one woman, how is that woman protected? And there's also no human resources department that these women can go to. There's no one they can complain to. They can't really complain to their agent or their manager because they're just going to tell them, just go with it, just be quiet. Women are socialized to go along with the dominant patriarchy. It's always been that way.
In fact, there's a clip for that. Can we play that?
Dr. Gray, you need to tell us what you want to do.
All the parts that I had been auditioning for were the girlfriend or the wife, so I did notice immediately that, oh, I get to be the lead role. I get to be a doctor, I get to have opinions, I get to be smart.
Shonda was able to make half of her cast not white.
Everyone, listen up, please. I was very lucky because Grey's Anatomy was developed under the network presidency of Susan Lyne. She had to fight really hard to get them to put it on the air.
When I called to say we were going to greenlight it, the male executive on the other end of the line literally hung up on me.
Have you felt your career jeopardized by your outspokenness about this?
Oh, no, actually, not at all. And I think it's because what I decided to do was I wanted the research so I could go directly to the creators and share it with them in a private and very friendly way, because I knew they didn't know what they were doing. You know, I'm sure they knew that they were making fewer films with a female lead, but they weren't aware that the population of the films were profoundly imbalanced, even the extras. And so that's what I did. And in fact, it's proven that they're incredibly grateful and horrified and embarrassed.
Really? Which is why none of them appeared in this film? Is that why? Because no studio heads appeared in this film?
Well, because even if it's unconscious, they're still embarrassed. And I think their legal departments also said, don't go on the record on this. It's not going to benefit you.
There are a number of women who are interviewed in this film whose careers have been damaged by speaking out.
Well, that's what I was talking about earlier, that it is a different time now, that you actually can talk about these things and not suffer repercussions.
Hopefully not. I think there is a bit of a backlash.
But that's what we were worried about. Nobody complained about anything because you felt that it would damage your career.
Do you think it's because your initial focus was kids television?
Yeah. I think the big advantage was that people who make kids entertainment do it because they care about kids. And so it was something they had no idea they were doing, and the data changed everything for them. Suddenly they realized they could see what they were doing, and we've yet to leave any meeting where somebody doesn't say, "You just changed my project." So it's kind of working.
So you can see it with kids' entertainment,
right?
But what about for grown-ups?
There hasn't been a lot of change. There's a lot of talk about change, and there's a lot more content being made. But a lot of the diversity that happens in content is happening at the lower pay levels.
Oh, yeah.
So the cheaper shows on Netflix and Hulu.
Well, you do interview one executive, the head of FX, John Landgraf. Okay, let me just play a clip from him in the film. Here it is.
I had this unconscious bias that we would have to be making sacrifices to hire people with less experience.
They don't care that I'm black.
And maybe that the talent wouldn't be there.
I think that they just don't like me.
Oh, they care plenty. And I'm here to say it's there.
There's nothing funny here.
The minute we open our door and we say, "Come express it here,"
welcome.
The work got better.
Hello, Daddy.
Feud is so good.
You directed an episode of it.
I did. It'll be on.
It's one of the best things that's ever happened in my professional career. Anyone who then told me or told any other journalist in the future, it's too hard. No, it's not. Look at what FX did.
You know, one of the things that really fascinated me about the film is that you point out it wasn't always this way.
Right.
In the age of silent films, women directed a lot of films. They had very prominent roles.
Oh, yeah.
So,
studio heads.
Mm-hmm. So what changed?
Well, two things. The coming of sound meant they needed a big capital investment. So they looked east to the banks, to basically the patriarchal systems in the East. And so they created the studio system in the West. You putting men in charge, basically driving women and people of color out. And then the second thing was unions. Unions did not allow women because putting women in the unions meant lower pay and lower prestige.
Oh.
So they were driven out of the unions. In the Directors Guild, there were only 2 women, I think, up until the 1960s who were members of the union.
Oh, so Jay, how do you stay in it, though? I mean, don't you just want to throw your shoes at the screen? I mean, you know.
Well, no. I'm an optimist. As defeated as one feels when you don't see the change happening, I really do think that it can and that it will. And I think the first thing to change will be on screen. It's the lowest hanging fruit possible, because the next movie somebody makes can be gender balanced. They can say, "What was I doing?" I'll let you know. I always say, go through the script and change a bunch of first names to female, and there you go. And then cast me. So I think that will change, and I think it will impact society, that life will imitate art. We don't have to wait for things to turn around in real life. We can reflect the future now, and it will make it happen.
Geena Davis, Tom Donahue, thank you so much for talking.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And This Changes Everything is in select theatres and on demand starting Friday. But that's it for now. Just join us again tomorrow for a preview of an amazing series about to debut on HBO, the true life drama that an Israeli and Palestinian filmmaker collaborated on. Remember, you can always listen to our podcast, see us online at amonpour.com, and follow me on Instagram and Twitter. Thanks for watching, and goodbye from London.
All new Inside Africa. Unlocking the mysteries behind the continent you thought you knew. Swatini, a music festival, helps young performers hone their skills to take center stage.
The hunger is there and the talent is there. It's abundant.
Inside Africa, Sunday, only on CNN, in association with Zenith Bank.
On the next Vital Signs, a growing beef with beef.
Our mission is very simple, to completely replace animals as a food technology.
Now, meat made from plants.
It's this quest to have it look like the meat that we're used to.
It'll be indistinguishable.
This really looks and smells just like a beef burger. And on the horizon, steak grown in a lab.
With very few cells, we can grow infinite amount of meat.
But will consumers bite?
Vital Signs, Saturday, in association with Bangkok Dusit Medical Services.
A country at war with itself as white supremacy takes to the streets. CNN investigates why white supremacy is showing its face.
Most people would not consider you white.
But it's not a popularity contest, is it? State of Hate, Saturday on CNN.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson.
It all starts here. Changing, fighting, creating, connecting. That's why we're here. We live here, we work here, we're from here, and we'll go wherever the story takes us. I'm Becky Anderson in Tehran. We are in Jerusalem. Real news that shapes our world. Exploring not just what's going on, but why. I just want to press you on one further point. Getting perspective on this region from this region. Places that many of us know, but few of us get to see. Observing countries on the move, still rooted in tradition. It all starts here, and that's why we're here, bringing you the world from our Middle Eastern hub.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson, Sunday to Thursday on CNN.
Business is all about making connections. But some connections are easier to make than others. With a CNN partner hotel, the world is always at your fingertips. CNN partner hotels, connected to your world.
For somebody to tell you their story, it's something I take really seriously. It's not something you can just parachute in and ask somebody to open their heart to you. To peel away the layers to get to the heart of the person who you're telling a story about.
France will never give up against the terrorists.
And delve beneath the surface of what's happening. You can hear their story, and then you're going to do their story justice. You have to show yourself to them.
So right now they're hovering pretty low over this area that's extensively flooded.
CNN's the right place to tell their story.
I'm Natalie Allen. This is CNN.
Recess, we can't even get the bill that was passed by the House.
Constituents of mine were telling me they're afraid to take their kids to the supermarket. We don't have to live this way. While we are a nation of immigrants, we are first and foremost a nation of laws. Those that weren't caught on the raids are afraid to go outside.
I need my dad. He's not a criminal.
Trump has this underlying strategy of inflicting trauma on children. That is just an evil policy we need to change.
This is New Day with Alison Camerata and John Berman.
Welcome to our viewers in the United States and all around the world. This is New Day. It's Friday, August 9th. It's 6 o'clock here in New York this morning. Allison is off. Erica Hill joins me in New York for the first time.
Nice to see you in person this morning.
Quite a week it has been. And as we wake up this morning, there is new movement on action to prevent gun violence and new fallout from the president's visits to Dayton and also El Paso, visits that we heard first here on New Day that some White House insiders considered a debacle. First, the action. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell now says legislation to expand background checks for gun purchases will be front and center in Senate deliberations. He says there's a lot of support for that. This is very different language than we have ever heard from the Majority Leader. But for now, it's just language. He will not call the Senate back from vacation to work on the measures immediately. Now, the president, he's been talking a lot about background checks, including talking with Democratic leaders Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. CNN's reporting is that the president's instinct is to expand background checks, but again, what will his action be? He has talked about background checks before, but has yet to expend any political capital to get them passed. Will he now, especially as he heads to summer vacation today? And this morning, a controversial picture posted by the First Lady holding a baby who lost her parents in the El Paso massacre. She is smiling. The president's flashing a thumbs up. There's a great deal of anger over this photo this morning, but also some important context. We're going to have much more on that shortly.
And as these discussions continue about potential gun control legislation, advocates say every single day that passes matters. And putting that into new perspective this morning, take a look at this breaking news from overnight. Reality playing out once again, this time in Missouri. Police this morning, and frankly, plenty of other folks, want to know why a man walked into a Walmart heavily armed, wearing combat fatigues, all while recording himself on a cell phone. That causing police to respond frantically to calls of an active shooter in the building. Now, no shots were fired. The panic, however, real. Omar Jimenez is live in Chicago with more of these details. What more do we know this morning, Omar?
Yeah, Erica, good morning. I mean, bottom line, these were some scary moments for these people. This man walks into this Walmart. As you mentioned, good news, no shots fired and no one injured. But police were responding to what they thought was a call for a potential active shooter, this time at another Walmart in Springfield, Missouri. Now, when they walk in, you see what he looked like as he walked in. You see what he was wearing, and you see what he was wielding, body armor and a rifle as he did so. Now, the motive is still under investigation by police, but we do know he was recording himself on a cell phone, pushing a cart around. When the manager there saw what he was doing, just casually walking around with that rifle, he pulled the fire alarm, urging people to get out. That's when people started evacuating. As we can imagine, the calls for that potential active shooter came in. And then it was an off-duty armed firefighter who actually held this man up until police got there only minutes later. And again, the good news, no shots fired and no one was injured. But here's what police had to say about the scene when they arrived, again, just minutes later.
He walked in here heavily armed with body armor on, in military fatigues, and caused a great amount of panic inside the store. So he certainly had the capability and the potential to harm people. He was compliant with us, but his intent was not to cause peace or comfort to anybody that was in the business here. In fact, he's lucky he's alive still, to be honest.
Now, it should be noted, Missouri is an open carry state for anyone above the age who's at least 19 years old, but it is illegal to carry a weapon in a threatening manner. Now, when you put this in context as well, I mean, this happened just 5 days after the shooting that unfolded in that El Paso Walmart, and between this and even the events earlier this week in Times Square where people were running from the backfired motorcycle, it's clear this is still very much on people's minds.
John, Omar, you can understand why people were nervous and scared about that, to be sure. I can't imagine what I would have thought had I saw that man walking through a Walmart this week. Joining us now, John Avlon, CNN senior political analyst, Tanzina Vega, host of The Takeaway, and Errol Lewis, political anchor at Spectrum News and a CNN political commentator. So we were saying there is new movement on action to battle gun violence this morning. Whether we choose to believe it's significant and lasting, that's another story. But people are talking in ways they have not talked before. And I want to play the sound of Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader. He's on a radio show, and he's explaining what he is going to do and, for lack of a better word, allow in the discussions over battling gun violence. So listen.
There's also been some discussion about background checks. That's an issue that's been around for a while. A lot of support for that, and there's a bipartisan bill in the Senate. Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, Republican, and Joe Manchin of West Virginia, a Democrat. So those are two items that for sure will be front and center as we see what we can come together on and pass.
Background checks, front and center. Now, who knows if Mitch McConnell will follow through with this when the Senate comes back in September. He's not calling him back now. Maybe this is just to relieve pressure. But Mitch McConnell hasn't spoken like this before in my memory.
No, and we run the risk of the triumph of hope over experience here, because he killed that very bill he lauded
after Sandy Hook. But he's recognizing reality. Background checks are massively popular with Republicans, say 87% support, as well as Democrats. This is a 90% issue. The president seems to have the instinct to go there as well. He initially tweeted it, then took it out of his speech. The NRA opposes it. Usually that drives the agenda in the Senate. But if Mitch McConnell's talking that way on local radio, because very often on local radio is where you're going to see senators actually say what they really think, that's a hopeful sign that maybe something might get done.
There's that hopeful sign, and then there's also, of course, the reporting. We talked a little bit about this yesterday, but the president speaking with Wayne LaPierre, the influence of the NRA, there's actually a little bit of movement there, too, where some of our reporting is that aides are saying the NRA may not be as powerful now as it has been in the past, Errol, and this could be exactly why we could see movement. All of these things brought together.
That's right. There might be sort of a perfect confluence of opportunity, right? I mean, when you've got the NRA, which has been, really divided at the top, infighting, lawsuits. They've shuttered their TV division. They really have much less of a presence. And while they're sort of trying to gain their feet, you actually have 24 Democratic candidates who are out there trying to sort of push in a different direction. They're not necessarily going to be sort of cowed or backed down by it. You have members of the Senate where that's also true. You have Mitch McConnell, who frankly is in trouble in his home state. He's up for re-election next year, and he's not doing so well. So, there are a lot of different things that could all fall into place. However, we all know that different things can happen. We've got this long break. They're clearly sort of playing for time. We know that other things can sort of take over the news cycle. We're going into fire season. We're going into hurricane season, protests in Hong Kong. There are a million different things that can happen, as well as some of the distractions that the president has already hinted at, talking about video games. Maybe we have a culture war discussion instead of actually doing some real legislating. But again, we should all stay hopeful.
Look, the president's going on vacation starting today. And John, I know you're going to talk about this later, but who knows what things he can say when he doesn't have as many of the babysitters around as he normally does inside the White House. Anything could happen. But the president does have the power to force this issue, Tanzania. I just think he does. There's no question that he has so much support among the base of the Republican Party and folks who have fought for gun violence prevention acts, that if he were to come out very publicly and say, this is the specific bill I want, wouldn't that make a difference?
I think a lot of Americans are expecting not only the president to take action, but the Congress to take action at this point. I mean, what is it going to take? We've seen children, elementary school children, mowed down by guns. We've seen, innocent people at a Walmart. You can't go to the movies anymore. Like, at what point are our public spaces becoming so unsafe that government officials are going to take action? I think that's what Americans, regardless of what side of the political divide they're on, are looking for. This is about common sense gun reform. This is not an either-or issue where we're saying no guns or all the guns, right? And I think that's where the NRA really stumbles, and the president talking to the NRA like this is a real problem for a lot of Americans. The question is, does the president have the confidence of the American people? And I think at this point, given what he did in El Paso and Dayton and beyond, I think he's lost a lot of that confidence.
Yes, but I wonder if enough people can get in his ear to say, you have lost that confidence, but this is a real opportunity for you. And we know that he was apparently talking about AIDS. He wants this Rose Garden signing ceremony. He could do things through executive order, which then he can say, look what I did. This is the president
which
saying
would probably
he did
be his
it.
biggest appeal.
Which would be his biggest appeal. In looking at all that, though, too, there's also the issue, John, of this is, to your point, it's not an either or. It's also not just a one-size-fits-all issue. So starting with one thing, moving on, the question then, too, is how much can we see a more holistic approach overall?
Sure, and Republicans always unilaterally sort of focus on the mental health and the video games of it, and Democrats want to deal with, the guns. There's hopeful you can make some gains on different fronts of this issue. I think a big, ambitious omnibus bill probably isn't going to happen given the divided nature of Congress. The question is, can you actually make some measurable progress, and at least on the red line and the background check? That should be doable.
It's doable if they want to do it.
That's right.
What we don't know, and we really don't know it, is if they actually want to do it in September when they come back. Yeah. And when we say it's an unknown, it really is genuinely unknown. I want to put up the photo that's caused a lot of controversy over the last 12 hours. This was posted by the First Lady, Melania Trump, on Twitter, and she's holding a baby boy. I spoke incorrectly before, and I said it was a baby girl. This is a baby boy who lost his parents in the massacre in El Paso. And the reason this photo is causing controversy is because, look, the First Lady's smiling. The president's flashing the thumbs up there. And this baby lost his parents. Now, people look at this and say, Earl, how could you take a picture flashing a thumbs up with an orphan like that, essentially. The other side of it is that the uncle who was standing in the photo is a Trump supporter. Apparently the father who was killed was also a Trump supporter. There is that context there still. You know, you take a step back when you see that.
Yeah, well, it is. And I would fault, frankly, the president's staff, right? I mean, the president himself, you know, you put him in front of a camera, he's going to do what politicians do. You know, they smile, they flash, they give their little thumbs up, they do what they're going to do. They needed to stage that quite a bit differently if they knew it was going to be for public consumption. Frankly, if this individual, if he's a big Trump supporter, if he wanted to say, look, it would be the honor of my life, I'm meeting the president of the United States, even in the middle of this tragedy, you know, I'm proud to meet the president, that's one thing. But for public consumption on what is a public trip, on which every step, every photo, every word is supposed to be, if not scripted, at least thought about. I'd say they really fell down.
Well, and the fact that it was tweeted out too by the First Lady, the photo, it would have been, to your point, Errol, a little bit different if this had come from the uncle who was there in the picture saying, what an honor to meet the president today. But seeing that tweeted out by the First Lady with the thumbs up sign, it's tough to ignore those optics.
I mean, there was a tone deafness to the visit as a whole, and I think, you know, we're seeing that from the president's aides, even saying that this didn't go quite so well. President flies into El Paso, there are protests everywhere, there's a lack of empathy coming from the president, so I think this is just another example of that level of tone deafness.
That's the issue. I mean, apparently, reportedly, the baby was brought back to the hospital. They tried to keep the press out. And some of the footage that's come out of the president's talking about how big the crowd size of his rally in El Paso was. And then this photo, what you have is a picture of a president who has an empathy deficit. He keeps acting like a malfunctioning automaton with these opportunities. Here, he's with an orphan child, and he reflexively does the grin and the thumbs up. That's just an empathy gap. And it's not too much to expect that the president would act like a normal human being. But instead, he's talking to the doctors at this hospital, which is flooded with shooting victims, and talking about how big his crowds were a few weeks ago. That's not a normal human response.
Or a helpful.
No.
A human response, which is the most important thing, I think, to the victims and the families of the victims and the people in El Paso and Dayton. Not helpful. All right, Errol, Tanzina, John, thank you very much. New overnight, President Trump announced his new pick for acting director of national intelligence. This came just minutes after we learned the nation's #2 intelligence official chose to resign. A resignation that's very controversial, Alex, because she has a ton of support inside the intelligence community. CNN's Alex Marquardt here in Washington with all the details.
Yeah, that's right, John. It is now not just that top intelligence job that the president needs to fill, but the top 2. The intelligence community now losing one of its most capable and respected leaders in Sue Gordon. She is widely adored, not just within that tight-knit community, but widely respected all across the aisle here in Washington. The writing, to some extent, had been on the wall when the president didn't name her to be the acting director of national intelligence when her boss, Dan Coats, steps down next week. Normally, she would have been the automatic and really logical choice, but now they're leaving together on August 15th. In a handwritten note to the president, Sue Gordon made it clear that leaving was not her preference, she said, but she told him, you should have your team. Now, when Coats and Gordon leave next week, retired Vice Admiral Joseph McGuire will step in as the acting director. He is currently the head of the National Counterterrorism Center. The president still hasn't said who he wants to nominate as a permanent DNI after his first choice, Texas Congressman John Radcliffe, withdrew himself after a 5-day firestorm over his lack of experience and exaggerated resume. With that move, with Radcliffe, the president had communicated that he wants more of a loyalist who he gets along with in the DNI role, unlike Dan Coats, and he's less interested in someone from the intelligence establishment like Sue Gordon. Lawmakers have also expressed their regret that Sue Gordon is leaving, with the Senate Intelligence Chairman Richard Burr calling it a significant loss. The ranking Democrat, Mark Warner, far harsher, saying that the president has shown he has no problem prioritizing his political ego, even if it comes at the expense of our national security. Erica.
All right, Alex, thank you. Well, moving into politics, this weekend, oh, John, you look excited. Are you having fond memories?
I read ahead here a little bit.
So,
go ahead.
So John skipped ahead, but you don't know this yet, so get ready. This weekend is all about butter, fried food.
2 of my favorite things, which every weekend, by the way, is about.
And you can even get fried butter, so there's really, it's such a win. Presidential politics in Iowa. Why the state fair? could once again be a make-or-break event, but this time for those Democratic presidential hopefuls, who's going to make it past Iowa?
And fried butter.
There's fried butter.
The Dangote Group stands at the forefront of African enterprise. Since 1978, we've touched the lives of millions of people by meeting their basic needs. Our belief in the promise of Africa has taken us into 14 African countries, with substantial investments that will propel the continent towards greater prosperity, promising jobs, improved standards of living, and economic growth. Dangote, for an empowered Africa.
A city that we dream of. A city that goes beyond our imagination. Where can it be? Right now at this moment, please focus your attention on Daegu, South Korea. Future city Daegu. It's closer than it looks.
We're headed south on the next CNN Business Traveler.
I haven't been back here to Mexico City in quite some time, so this is where we start.
From high-end to low cost.
You've created a whole new market where there wasn't one before.
And our most important competitors is the post market. Plus the new way to combine work and play.
So we just want to help more people have this life-changing global experience. Ah, perfecto.
On the next CNN Business Traveler.
This is the 100 Club, our look at companies that are 100 years old or older.
When I talk to anybody and tell them I work at Crayola, they always have a story to share about their first box, their first 64-count box, or the 24-count box that they used for school.
Crayola, the name synonymous with crayons, actually began 116 years ago under a different name, Benny and Smith, the company's founders. In 1903, the Crayola brand was born, with the first box of crayons in 8 colors.
We were selling Crayola chalk in schools, and we noticed that the kids didn't have any colored wax sticks to color with. And so our founders, Benny and Smith, wanted to create a wax crayon that would be affordable for kids to use in the classroom.
All new African Voices Changemakers. Create opportunities. Impact communities. Transform lives. This week, meet 2 Nigerians giving amputees a new lease on life.
I felt fulfilled seeing that I could help a child, and there's a platform that we could use to help.
African Voices Changemakers, Sunday on CNN.
I think it's expertise and passion for the story.
If you've been there, you know what's going on.
CNN Today with Michael Holmes and Amara Walker, weekdays.
It's a metaphor for everyday life. What I would like to do is inspire other people to take on their own Everest.
It's a very unique environment to be in. There's a lot of emotion here right now.
I just think it was such a letdown.
The journey continues.
I don't think I've ever seen anywhere quite like this. It's otherworldly. It's a bit scary here, if I'm to be honest. Today really was the never-ending day.
The Challenge Everest on CNN. Many of the statues ISIS toppled were fakes.
$500 for 2 children. Just sold off like that.
Robin, it was a surreal period.
The 2020 Democrats descending on Iowa for the state fair and some meet and greets that could really shake up the race. The political stakes are high in the key early voting state. Today, day 2 of the Iowa State Fair, we'll see more candidates And more soapboxes. CNN's Jeff Zeleny is live in Des Moines. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Erica. There's no question that all eyes of this Democratic primary race are here in Iowa. Joe Biden at the state fair yesterday really making his case, trying to reframe the race that he is trying to show that he's the strongest Democrat to take on Donald Trump. When Joe Biden was walking around the grounds of the Iowa State Fair yesterday, he was asked how it feels to be a frontrunner, if he feels he is still the frontrunner. He said, "Do I still have that target on my back?" So clearly, Joe Biden had a bit of a bounce in his step. One reason why is in this new Monmouth University Iowa poll that was out just yesterday, he is showing a steady lead. He is still leading the pack of candidates here. And Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have essentially flipped. Elizabeth Warren has gained considerable ground since the last poll was taken in April. So that is sort of setting the a mood here in Iowa as all the candidates are descending. As you said, 4 candidates will be here on the fairgrounds later today, but then all candidates tonight will be at the Wingding. That is a traditional event in northern Iowa at the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake, Iowa. Each candidate will have 5 minutes to make their case to voters here. But really the moment is Joe Biden leading the pack and others trying to make their case as well. Kamala Harris is making a significant move here in Iowa. She was out with her first ad yesterday. But it is the race between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders that has a lot of Democrats here keeping an eye on the movement there. Bernie Sanders, of course, he nearly won the Iowa caucuses 4 years ago, coming just behind Hillary Clinton, but he is falling a little bit. So that is sort of setting the table here as a big Iowa political weekend begins. John?
All right, Jeff Zeleny, I see the fried butter stain on your shirt this morning. Jeff, stand by. We have a lot more.
Right there.
We have a lot more to talk about, including, I think, this is the most we've seen of Joe Biden in the retail politics setting in this campaign. How did he do? What does it mean for his chances in Iowa? And what is the state of the Democratic race this morning? That's next.
Signature. Grow your media business at 2454 Abu Dhabi, your gateway to the Middle East and North Africa. Home to over 470 businesses across production, gaming, digital, advertising, and more. Enjoy 0% corporate tax, 30% cashback rebate on productions, a full suite of media services, and state-of-the-art facilities on our media campus. With 0 license and registration fees for your first 2 years, our business development team will guide you through our simple setup process to get your business up and running. Our community provides access to world-class services and facilities inside a thriving media ecosystem, ensuring your success. So get in on the action at the Capital for Content Creators. Join us at 2454.com/join.
On the next Vital Signs, a growing beef with beef.
Our mission is very simple, to completely replace animals as a food technology.
Now, meat made from plants.
It's this quest to have it look like the meat that we're used to.
It'll be indistinguishable. This really looks and smells just like a beef burger. And on the horizon, steak grown in a lab.
With very few cells, we can grow infinite amount of meat.
But will consumers bite?
Vital Signs, Saturday, in association with Bangkok Dusit Medical Services.
I'm Matt Rivers in Lhasa, Tibet, and this is CNN.
you travel the world, make sure the world travels with you. Check in, log on, and get connected with all of the latest developments at your fingertips. CNN Partner Hotels. Connected to your world.
Cumbia dance, it's a very particular dance from the Caribbean region, and they're always playing these dances with drums. We use these expressions of dance when we have festivals or carnivals.
I'm George Howell. This is CNN.
This morning, a new poll shows just how the race in Iowa is shaping up as the candidates stump for votes at the state fair. Former Vice President Joe Biden remains a steady front-runner, as you see there on your screen. Senator Elizabeth Warren, though, making some moves. She now has a firm hold of second place. Let's bring back Errol Lewis, Jeff Saloni, and Tenzina Vega. And, Jeff, we just talked to you briefly, but just to get your take, too, as we look at these polling numbers and what we're seeing on the ground, what is the sense there in terms of how these numbers translate to what you're hearing?
Well, there's no question that Elizabeth Warren has been organizing and building a campaign here that, by all accounts, by all measures, is stronger than most of her other rivals. So the rise of Elizabeth Warren here is coming at the same time she is building this ground organization. And some of the same people who are working on her team here worked on that Barack Obama campaign some 12 years ago. It seems like a long time ago, but it's still relevant in politics today because he really did build this county by county organization. So Elizabeth Warren's rise, in many respects, she is Bernie Sanders 2.0. She is sort of a new version of what he was representing 4 years ago. So all eyes will be on Elizabeth Warren. And I am hearing fewer questions about her electability. That's one thing you heard earlier this year. Is she able to win? Is she able to beat Donald Trump? Fewer Democrats are saying that. They like her plans. But I also, after talking to a lot of voters here at the Iowa State Fair yesterday, Kamala Harris also has a lot of interest. They like how she performed at the first debate, not the second debate perhaps so much, but she is certainly is gaining ground as well. But I do have to say, Joe Biden remains a favorite, as the poll indicates. And, he has had a strong couple days here in Iowa, perhaps the strongest of his campaign, but there is still a question hanging over him. Is he the new fresh blood that Democrats usually choose? If you look back to election, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, going before that, Jimmy Carter, John F. Kennedy. Barack Obama certainly doesn't fit that mold, but he may fit the moment for this party as Democrats are looking for someone to take on Donald Trump.
And Tenzina, as you watch Joe Biden over the last few days, he is trying to carve out a very specific space because he gave that really tough speech, blistering speech about the president. But then yesterday, he was pressed a number of times if he would out and out call the president a white supremacist, which some of the other Democratic candidates have done. And listen to how he responded here. This is S12.
Why are you so hooked on that? You just want me to say the words so I sound like everybody else. He is encouraging white supremacists. You can determine what that means. I know everybody wants somebody to call somebody a liar. When you say, I don't call people liars, I say they don't tell the truth, okay? You want to hear me say liars, you can put it out and say, Biden calls someone a liar. That's not who I am. You got the wrong guy.
How do you read that?
John, we have to remember, right, that rhetoric has consequences, and the president's rhetoric has had serious consequences to the point that people have lost their lives, right? And I think what's interesting about Elizabeth Warren's rise is that she has called the president a white supremacist, and she's getting this bump in polling. So I think that it's important to note that maybe this idea of having to be the moderate, which I think Joe Biden has been trying to play off of, not being too radical, not being too conservative of a Democrat, is really, maybe that gamble is not going to pay off in 2020. I think Americans are saying, you know what, call the thing what it is. And Elizabeth Warren is doing that, and Joe Biden, I think, is hedging a little bit too much, despite the speech that he gave earlier this week.
Which is interesting because the question, too, and you had actually talked a little bit about this yesterday, the question is, what can he carry forward from that speech? Because there was so much praise for this speech in the way he came out so forceful, so energetic. And Errol,
That's right.
Now we move on.
That's right. Well, and you don't use that speech while you're shaking hands at the Iowa State Fair. I'll tell you that. I mean, this is going to be that kind of delicate balancing act that Joe Biden knows about and is good at. I mean, I read him refusing to sort of take the bait of the assembled press there as him kind of looking a little bit down the road, that you're not going to win a name-calling contest with Donald Trump. You call him a liar, you call him a supremacist, he's going to come up with 1,000 new nicknames and throw them back at you. And we've seen in the past that when people have tried to match him and play his game, he always wins the game because he sort of wrote the rules for that game. One thing that's interesting that's kind of buried in the Monmouth poll is that there's not a lot of optimism among Iowa Democratic caucus goers that more than half of the field can actually take on Donald Trump. So this question about, well, when does the field winnow down? Well, we're TV people, we're media people, so we're looking to see who's going to make the debate stage and so forth. The voters are way ahead. They're saying, like, look, we don't think most of these people can beat Donald Trump. Yeah. And I think we're going to start to see them making their own choices, and that's why you see so much movement in the polls.
One of the things you could say whether or not Joe Biden is being too moderate, being too liberal, the one thing Joe Biden needs to be good at, Jeff, before anything else, is being good at being Joe Biden, right? And so in that answer, you saw him fiery and feisty. Whether or not he was carving out the right political position, that might be discussed there, but he was comfortable in how he was answering that. You haven't totally seen that before. So this weekend he might be, or this week I should say, he may have found a space he likes to operate in more. That's not to say that he hasn't been Joe Biden that we've seen over years with some gaffes the last few days. He said some things which were controversial. What did he say? He said that,
poor kids are just as smart as white kids,
exactly,
or something to that effect, which obviously that makes you stop.
And also confusing Theresa May with Margaret Thatcher, things like that. So that's all part of the Joe Biden package.
There's no question Joe Biden was on full Joe Biden mode yesterday, if you will. I mean, Joe Biden loves to get ice cream. He loves to shake hands, and that's really what he was doing. But John, I think you're right. I saw a different sense of energy in Joe Biden over the last couple days. He has been trying to reframe this race, make this race about him versus Donald Trump, make this a referendum on Donald Trump. That's what he wants this contest to be about. It's why he jumped into this campaign. First and foremost, I was talking with him yesterday, and I asked him if he thinks that this week does represent a turning point, and he said it should. He said it should focus the idea, contest of voters. Think of what's happening just a week ago. Democrats were engaged in this huge food fight on our debate stage in Detroit. That is largely gone away for now. Well, I think it's on hiatus, we should say. People are still going to be fighting over their Medicare for all plans, etc. But Joe Biden has tried to focus this contest back on the matter at hand, if you will. And here in Iowa, it is a battleground state. Donald Trump won this state 4 years ago. But that's one other thing I'm picking up talking to voters. Who can win in the general election? Yes, that is a long ways away, more than a year away, but that is what is also on the mind of some pragmatic voters here. So that is sort of a dual track, if you will, and Joe Biden has tried to ride both of that, trying to make the case that he is in this for the long term, not just trying to win a Democratic primary race.
Tinsley and Errol said something that was very interesting, which is, it's a 24-candidate race, but when you look at the polls, I just don't think the voters necessarily see it that way.
No, they don't. And I don't think a lot of voters could even name all of the candidates at this point. I mean, we really are looking at a solid core of maybe 5 candidates whose names are now maybe household names at this point. The recognition of these candidates is important. I think we saw even on the debate stage, half of the folks on the stage were really not resonating with a lot of voters. And I think if you go outside right now into the street corner of New York and ask anybody who the 24 are, you wouldn't get a lot of answers. So, I mean, Joe Biden also has that name recognition. He's been the vice president. He's run for president twice. He invokes Obama's name when it's necessary and, if, dare I say, convenient. So that also has a lot to do with potentially why he's leading in the polls.
We'll see how long that lasts, too, as we move further in.
All right, thank you so much, friends. Coming up at 8, one candidate just won a ticket to the next debate stage. What does Andrew Yang plan to do to keep rising in the polls?
Authorities arresting hundreds in immigration raids in Mississippi. So what happened to the children who were their first day of school as ICE took their parents into custody during those raids? And did that figure in at all when it comes to the timing? That's next.
We're headed south on the next CNN Business Traveler.
I haven't been back here to Mexico City in quite some time, so this is where we start.
From high-end to low cost.
You've created a whole new market where there wasn't one before.
And our most important competitors is the boss market, plus the new way to combine work and play.
So we just want to help more people have this life-changing global experience.
Ah, perfecto.
On the next CNN Business Traveler.
It's a metaphor for everyday life. What I would like to do is inspire other people to take on their own Everest.
It's a very unique environment to be in. There's a lot of emotion here right now.
I just think it was such a letdown.
The journey continues.
I don't think I've ever seen anywhere quite like this. It's otherworldly. It's a bit scary here, if I'm to be honest. Today really was the never-ending day.
The Challenge Everest on CNN. The journey to the top for a successful business in Africa starts with an idea. But how does a concept become a moneymaker? African and global industry leaders share their stories. Sunday on Profit Point in CNN Marketplace Africa in association with Dangote.
And now, a moment of wonder from Great Big Story.
10,000 के ऊपर पोर्टफोलियो मिलेंगे पोर्टल के वजह से अभी 3.5 साल में कम से कम 15,000 लोगों की जाने गई है लेकिन उन गड्ढों के वजह से मैंने अपना बच्चा प्रकाश खोया और वहां से मेरी ये शुरुआत हो गई मैं बोला मेरे दुकान के सामने गाड़ी गिर रही है तो मैं क्यों बैठूं तो मैं थोड़ा सा वो गड्ढा भरने निकल गया मैंने अपना बच्चा खोया तो और किसी का ना खो जान में जब तक जान है और सड़कों पे गड्ढे हैं तब तक ये काम करूंगा जिस दिन सड़कों पे गड्ढे खत्म हो जाएंगे उस दिन मैं अपना काम रोक दूंगा
For more stories like this, visit greatbigstory.com.
Business never sleeps. As the sun sets in Seoul and Shanghai, deals are signed in Dubai, and Europe is already in play. New York prepares to make its first move. I'm Julia Chatterley, journalist, global market analyst, and host of CNN's newest business show, First Move. Join me in the financial capital of the world for market-moving perspective on the news influencing global politics, culture, and finance. I'll speak to newsmakers, risk-takers, and the ultimate game changers. Bold moves, big deals, winning trades. It's all right here. Make CNN your first move.
First Move with Julia Chatterley. Tonight on CNN.
I'm Patrick Ottman in Havana, Cuba. This is CNN.
We have new developments in Mississippi this morning where immigration authorities arrested nearly 700 undocumented workers in a record-setting sweep at 7 Mississippi food processing plants. The raids, which happened on the very first day of school, left many children without their parents feeling deserted and afraid.
Governments, please put your heart. Let my parents be free with everybody else, please. Don't leave the child's with cryiness and everything. I need my dad for me. My dad didn't do nothing. He's not a criminal. Please, can I just see my mother, please? Please.
I need my dad. Can I please see my mother? Joining me now is Larison Campbell, a Mississippi Today political reporter who's been on this story since it broke, and it did come as a surprise. Larison, first where we are now, we heard the pleas from those children. Are there guarantees that all these children for whom their parents may have been brought in, taken away, are they all being cared for this morning?
I mean, John, that is a great question. Right now, we know very, very little. And I think that's honestly because, you know, the people in charge of this investigation, DHS, ICE, the U.S. Attorney's Office, they know very, very little. I've seen the contents of emails. I've heard reports from people on the ground in the schools, and ICE ignored its own protocol, which was, you know, contacting CPS, was contacting the schools, getting these things in place for the children before this raid was supposed to even take place. And they didn't do that. They ignored their own protocols. And I think for the people who've been trying to take care of these children, you know, it's been chaos. We don't know how many children have been reunited with their parents. We don't know how many children were even affected in the first place. So, yeah, there are a lot of unknowns right now.
In the Mississippi, the state Child Protection Services, what kind of a heads up were they given?
That's correct.
Were they given any?
They were given absolutely... No, they weren't. I actually checked in with them last night, and the response I got back from my contact there was crickets. We're talking a day and a half after this raid took place, and they still haven't reached out to the agency in charge of the welfare of children in this state. They still don't know how many kids were even affected, and they've had a ton of people reaching out to them, you know, offering clothes, offering food, offering shelter, and they haven't been able to take any of those people up on their offers because they don't know where these children are.
This morning, there's some new reporting on just how secretive and how long the planning was for this large effort. One thing was the White House wasn't even alerted because I think they were afraid, there's some reporting this morning, that the president would leak it in advance like he did earlier in this summer. But walk us through, to the extent that you've pieced it together, exactly what happened and what the day was like for these children and their parents.
Sure. So from what I've gleaned, the raid took place around 7:30, 8 in the morning at these processing plants. And only then did those in charge of the raid actually reach out to schools. And I think that even happened towards the end of the day, because the reports I've heard are things like principals calling school bus drivers and saying, wait, make sure you have eyes on parents when you're dropping these kids off at the schools. Do not leave a child unattended in their home. If they don't seem like they have parents at home, bring them back to the school and we're going to take care of them. You know, I think everything seems sort of like a after the fact. The first concern, and this is also according to the U.S. Attorney's Office, the first concern was conducting the raid. The second concern was the children. And again, you know, back in 2007, they set these protocols at ICE saying that child welfare needs to be informed before the raid takes place. Schools need to be informed. We need to protect these children to mitigate the kind of trauma that this sort of displacement could, or this displacement could cause, and that wasn't done.
We know this morning, we're told at least by government officials, that about half of the people who were initially brought in have been released. The others still in custody. You know, 700 people, workers targeted. Larson, any sense of the companies themselves were targeted? They're the ones who hired the undocumented workers. What ramifications are there for the companies?
So far, none. It's only been workers who've been targeted. I haven't heard of anything happening to the management who hired them.
Wow. All right, Larson Campbell, again, it's great to have you on with us. Thanks so much for your reporting and work on this. Please keep us posted as to what you hear, because there are still so many questions this morning.
There are. Thank you so much, John.
All right, Erica.
All right, John, thanks. And we're going to speak with some folks from the local schools, too, a little bit later this morning to get some more, to find out when they got calls, because they don't have those answers either. We do have some of our first polls showing how voters think candidates performed in the CNN debates. Harry Etten is here to show us the candidates moving up and moving down.
South Africa, where the Atlantic and the Indian Oceans meet. Here you'll meet the unexpected. You'll meet new ideas shared over interesting plates. You'll meet an energy unlike in any other place. In the very place where our humanity began. Come meet the biggest experiences of your life, and you'll meet a piece of yourself that will be forever changed. South Africa. Meet here, grow anywhere.
Grow your media business at 2454 Abu Dhabi, your gateway to the Middle East and North Africa. Home to over 470 businesses across production, gaming, digital, advertising, and more. Enjoy 0% corporate tax, 30% cashback rebate on productions, a full suite of media services, and state-of-the-art facilities on our media campus. With 0 license and registration fees for your first 2 years, our business development team will guide you through our simple setup process to get your business up and running. Our community provides access to world-class services and facilities inside a thriving media ecosystem, ensuring your success. So get in on the action at the Capital for Content Creators. Join us at 2454.com/join.
On the next Vital Signs, a growing beef with beef.
Our mission is very simple, to completely replace animals as a food technology.
Now, meat made from plants.
It's this quest to have it look like the meat that we're used to.
It'll be indistinguishable.
This really looks and smells just like a beef burger.
And on the horizon, steak grown in a lab.
With very few cells, we can grow infinite amount of meat.
But will consumers bite?
Vital Signs, Saturday, in association with Bangkok Dusit Medical Services. All new inside Africa. Unlocking the mysteries behind the continent you thought you knew. In Eswatini, a music festival helps young performers hone their skills to take center stage.
The hunger is there and the talent is there. It's abundant.
Inside Africa, Sunday, only on CNN, in association with Zenith Bank.
A country at war with itself as white supremacy takes to the streets. CNN investigates why white supremacy is showing its face.
Most people would not consider you white.
But it's not a popularity contest, is it?
State of Hate, Saturday on CNN.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson.
It all starts here. Changing, fighting, creating, connecting. That's why we're here. We live here, we work here, we're from here, and we'll go wherever the story takes us. I'm Becky Anderson in Tehran. We are in Jerusalem. Real news that shapes our world. Exploring not just what's going on, but why. I just want to press you on one further point. Getting perspective on this region from this region. Places that many of us know, but few of us get to see. Observing countries on the move, still rooted in tradition. It all starts here, and that's why we're here, bringing you the world from our Middle Eastern hub.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson, Sunday to Thursday on CNN.
I'm Michael Holmes on the Mexico-Guatemala border, and this is CNN.
The first round of post-debate polls are in, so where's the movement going? Who's up, who's down? Let's get the forecast with CNN senior politics writer and analyst, Harry Anton.
Shalom, everyone. Good Shabbos to you. Let's just jump right into it. And it turns out, if we look at the polls, post-debate, pre-debate, it's the same old race. Joe Biden's still ahead. He's dropped a little bit in Harry's average, but really this is just noise. Sanders and Warren basically fighting it out for second place. I would say the one thing we can say now, which was becoming clear pre-debate and now is clear post-debate, Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg are basically now tied for fourth place. Harris is not part of, say, that second tier with Sanders and Warren.
Yeah, there was a lot of movement, but it all happened before the CNN debate. So a lot of this is static, from after.
Right. This was a debate where I think a lot of people recognize that not a lot really happened in terms of moving things. But what is powering Joe Biden's lead right now? It's that same thing. Among African-American voters, he's crushing it. 50%. Bernie Sanders is not even close, 12%. This is a huge, huge lead that's powering it. Of course, they make up about 1/5 to a quarter of all voters. Just for some historical context here, I look back at the 2008 cycle, where we were in August of 2007, took an average of polls then among African-American voters. I think there are a few interesting things here. Number one, there was obviously a lot of movement because of Barack Obama overwhelmingly went on to win African-Americans, winning about 80% of them in the primary. But the other thing that I think is important is a lot of people saying, oh, Joe Biden right now, when the other candidates, especially the African-American candidates like Kamala Harris, become better known, they'll rise up and they'll be able to overtake Biden based upon where Obama was. But Harris is not anywhere close to where Obama was at this point. Biden's actually running ahead of Clinton, and no one's really close. So to me, this is like a real sort of, this could be real for Joe Biden.
If Kamala Harris or Cory Booker is going to do what Obama did, they're far away from where he was right now. That's important historical context.
Exactly right. One other thing I'll note from our debate, we were talking about not there too much being a bump. Cory Booker, who had a good debate, 2%, not much going on there. Marianne Williamson, who received a lot of press based upon her debate performance, not a lot of bump there either.
0 to 0.
0 to 0. That's pretty much the definition of no movement. Look at this. So this is Iowa caucuses, right? This is the first in the nation primary contest. You know, you were talking about it earlier in the show. This is the new Monmouth poll. Joe Biden still ahead here, 28%. That's not much different than the 27%. The big movement here is Senator Elizabeth Warren. But of course, this probably happened mostly pre-debate based upon the other polling that we were generally seeing. But right now, basically, you have a 1-2 matchup, Biden-Warren, then everybody else back in here, 3 through 5, right around 8 to 11%.
It is really remarkable when you look at it, and so really how little change there has been.
There has been so little change that's sort of been
except I will note for this guy.
Oh yes, that is the one thing.
True.
And we've sort of seen that nationally do a little bit of it too. Bernie Sanders basically being replaced in that very liberal lane by Elizabeth Warren, who's jumped very much up. Another thing I point out about this Iowa poll that I think is important, you know, I usually don't go down to this level, but Andrew Yang qualified for the debate. You need 2% in 4 qualifying polls. He got it. Tom Steyer's been spending millions of dollars on the air in Iowa. He got to 3%. Now he has 3 or 4 qualifying polls. Do not be surprised to see him on the debate stage come September. It turns out you can buy your way onto a debate stage. At least Tom Steyer is proving that right now.
So the Beatles were wrong.
The Beatles, you know, I was more of a Monkees fan anyway.
I'm learning so much this morning, as I always do.
You know what? We're learning musical interests. We're doing polls. Who says polls can't be fun, kids? This is important. I basically went back and looked at the polls in August before the caucuses since 1980 and what percentage of the time different candidates won. So Joe Biden's right now in this range, right? The 25 to 30% range. Usually those candidates win about 30 to 40% of the time, which makes him a front runner. But if you were betting on someone to win the nomination, you'd probably bet on someone else. Someone like Elizabeth Warren, 20%, they win about 20% of the time. Even those candidates down by 1%, they win a little bit of the time, so it's not over yet.
No, I mean, you won't bet on someone else. You'd bet on the field against Joe Biden. You'd still much rather have a 40% chance than a 10% chance.
Right, that's exactly right. One other thing I'll just point out, just to put this into a little bit more context. You know, Joe Biden's been compared to Jeb Bush, Rudy Giuliani, Joe Lieberman, weak frontrunners who are just based off of name recognition. But Biden's polling right now is well above where these folks were in Iowa at this point. So he's clearly sort of beaten back that. He's gotten over a hump to some extent. And one last thing, I have a new podcast, folks. This is the Forecast Fest with me and John Avalon and Kate Baldwin. You should listen. It's good stuff.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Very excited about it.
If you like what you heard, the Forecast Fest, you should subscribe via iTunes.
Very good, Harry Henton. Thank you very much. By the way, thanks for the invite to be on the podcast.
Both of you are going to be invited.
None.
Harry and I were actually talking about dates earlier.
I
So
get by again.
we'll get John from the break.
Sounds good.
Noted. All right, coming up, a new scare in a nation on edge. What we know about a heavily armed man who walked through a Walmart and sent police scrambling to the store.
If you guys, coming to my show, please take off the shoes. It's much better to enjoying for the, this comfortable feeling. This show, Murakami versus Murakami, is 1 decade my history. If the audience came to this show, so very understanding for my background and what's going on right now, my vision. Each room having my different my identity, but like when I'm making for the museum show, is mostly focusing for the how can making entertaining.
We live in such a fast-paced world where the news has been so relentless. Historic events have happened one after the other. I think that you need that daily appointment with viewers around the world to try and sort through the news of the day. What's important? Why does it matter to me? How do I put it all in context? We follow the news as it happens and where it happens. And then we also take a step back to walk the viewer through the day's news. That is the mission of Halagarani tonight.
the weather. Sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Hi there, my name is Fanny Sharkari and I'm a city guide for Budapest Underguide. Budapest is an amazing city, a very open-minded one. But as you might know, this country lived in a communist system until 1989. Now, I'm going to take you back in time. Welcome to Memento Park. In my back you can see all the statues that were taken away from the center of Budapest after the 50-year-long communism we had. So back in the year 89-90, most of the statues were sort of like destroyed. So the ones you can see over here were like kept as a memory from back from the communist era.
I'm Nick Robertson in Aden, Yemen, and this is CNN.
Our new this morning, Miami Dolphins wide receiver Kenny Stills tells CNN he has received multiple death threats in the past 24 hours for his comments about Dolphins owner Stephen Ross. Andy Scholes with the new details this morning, the Bleacher Report. Andy.
Yeah, good morning, John. You know, Kenny Stills, he was one of the first players to join Colin Kaepernick in his protest of social injustice during the national anthem. And Stills kneeling during the anthem once again last night. And this comes a day after Stills criticized Dolphins owner for what he says is playing both sides. So Stephen Ross, the owner of the Dolphins, he has a foundation called Rise, whose mission is to fight for equality and against racism. Well, Ross is also hosting a fundraiser for President Trump at his home in the Hamptons today, and Stills tweeting that you can't have a nonprofit with this mission statement, then open your doors to Trump. And after last night's game, Stills explained to CNN's Coy Wire why he felt the need to call out his owner.
I just was baffled more than anything because, you look at the work that he's done or the work that he's trying to do through Rise, and then you look at the work that the man that he's, hosting a fundraiser for has done, and it didn't align, it didn't make sense.
Now, Stephen Ross releasing a statement saying, I have known Donald Trump for 40 years, and while we agree on some issues, we strongly disagree on many others, and I have never been bashful about expressing my opinions. And John Ross also adding that while some prefer to sit outside of the process and criticize, he prefers to engage directly and support the things he deeply cares about.
All right, Andy Scholes watching that very closely. There's major controversy out in the Hamptons this morning about Stephen Ross also. We'll get to those demonstrations in a little bit. Andy, thank you very much. So is there new progress this morning in the push to battle gun violence in America? There are major new developments. There are a lot of new words being spoken. We'll tell you what they mean next.
I was here 3 months ago. We made a speech, and there was some crowd.
People are recovering from serious injuries. I was thinking about is this crowd.
What we're talking about here is a constitutional right. We have to be very cautious about how we limit that.
He's happy to hold back these kinds of bills. We need to defeat Mitch McConnell.
Please, could I just see my mother, please?
Through the hard work of these men and women in law enforcement, we're once again becoming a nation of law and order.
680 people who were detained from 7 different sites in 6 cities.
This isn't response to some sense that we have a crisis. That narrative doesn't exist here.
This is New Day with Allison Camerata and John Grumman.
All right, welcome to our viewers in the United States and all around the world. This is New Day. Allison is off. Erica Hill joins me in New York. And this morning, we do have developments in the effort to fight gun violence in America. A mixture of the very new and the very old. First, the new. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, he is using language I don't think he has ever really used before on background checks. He says a discussion on background checks, expanding them for gun purchases, those discussions will be front and center. Again, I don't think I've ever heard him say that exactly. But it's just movement in language from Mitch McConnell so far. That's new. What's old, it's not happening now. McConnell is not calling the Senate back into action now. They are on recess, so this will have to wait until September. Likewise, from the President of the United States, he has been talking about background checks, including with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer talking about it. CNN is reporting that the president seems intrigued by them. His gut is telling him to do that, but he's talked about background checks before. Will he expend any political capital? We just don't know. What we do know, he is going on vacation today.
Well, meantime, the gun control debate and the fallout from the president's visit to Dayton and his visit to El Paso really overshadowing a significant upheaval in the nation's intelligence sector. The Deputy Director of National Intelligence, Sue Gordon, abruptly resigning, joining her outgoing boss, Dan Coats. President Trump quickly handpicking a new acting director. So keep in mind here, what this means is the two top intelligence posts in the nation are unfilled.
All right, joining us now, Joe Lockhart, CNN political commentator and former Clinton White House press secretary. Tara Setmayer, CNN political commentator. Raul Reyes, CNN opinion writer. I want to play you the sound from Mitch McConnell because, again, these are words that I haven't heard from him before in this years-long now discussion on battling gun violence in America. Listen.
There's also been some discussion about background checks. That's an issue that's been around for a while. A lot of support for that, and there's a bipartisan bill in the Senate. Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, Republican, and Joe Manchin of West Virginia, a Democrat. So those are two items that for sure will be front and center as we see what we can come together on and pass.
Background checks, Joe, front and center. Again, not what we've heard from Mitch McConnell in the past. New words. New words. As a Democrat, do you find that encouraging? In other words, enough?
Actually, not really, John. I've listened very carefully to what he said. Acknowledging that it's front and center is acknowledging the obvious. It's what everyone's talking about. He didn't say he'd bring the Senate back. He didn't say he would commit to bringing something to the floor. He could have very easily said that. I think Mitch McConnell knows that there are a number of Republicans in cycle up for re-election this year. They're under some pressure. He was giving them a little space and a little protection there, but he's made no new commitments. And the one thing Mitch McConnell knows is there are not 60 votes in the Senate for any of these bills. Republicans, there just aren't enough Republicans to vote for them. So I don't take any real meaning in it beyond recognizing that there's some political peril for the position they've taken.
I would say you also can't fail to take into account that the one, it's not really a vote, but really the one person who matters in all of this is President Trump. Because this could go, I mean, this could all, especially with 2 weeks of vacation coming up, everything could be up in the air, Tara. And as you look at this, one other thing that stood out to me in terms of that interview, what Mitch McConnell said is he said, we can't fail to pass something. So he knows, right?
Right.
He knows something needs to be done, but he also knows that if the president is not on board, this could be a major concern for him and for some of those other folks who are vulnerable.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, we were in a similar situation after Parkland where the country, most recently, I mean, Sandy Hook was another example further back, but most recently after Parkland and then after Las Vegas, you know, the president was in the same space where he saw that the country was really crying out for something to be done. You know, enough is enough. We've got to do something. And he made promises to Democrats at the time, and then the NRA got to him, and nothing happened of any real consequence. The difference now, though, I think, is that the NRA being in such disarray, they are considerably less influential than they were back then. The internecine war that's going on in the NRA has cost them a lot of money and some political capital, I think, and there may be some room here. And Mitch McConnell knows that there are people that are up for re-election. They know that the suburban voters, particularly suburban women, they're not going to tolerate nothing being done. And I think you hear a lot more Republicans than you did before speaking out, from Adam Kinzinger to Representative Peter King, who was one of 5 Republican congressmen who co-sponsored H.R. 8, the bipartisan legislation that passed the House. It was, I think, 240 to 190. So you had a lot of Republicans that were supportive of that bill. I think, you have more people like Mike Turner of Ohio, whose daughter was across the street from where the massacre happened in Dayton, having a change of heart because it starts to hit home a little bit more. And I think if the president can stay focused long enough and not let some of the more extreme gun rights folks talk him out of it, there may be room for something. But until we see a concrete bill or something like that come out from Trump saying, I support this, I wouldn't hold my breath.
The other thing we would need is leadership. Mitch McConnell and the president could choose, Raul, to lead on this, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. But as Tara said, the big question, the big issue is that one thing we know about this president is during his administration, he has been a very unreliable negotiator. I mean, he came forward at one point signing on to a potential immigration deal with the Democrats. And then a week later, he said, oh, that was all out the window. This subject has his attention right now at the moment. But to me, it's very telling that who was he consulting this week when at least 2 phone calls was the head of the NRA, rather than, say, some of the different groups that are working to combat gun violence. And I just want to remind people, this has received, again, so much attention because we've seen these horrendous mass shootings. But to the American public, this really is not necessarily a contentious issue when you have something like 86% of people favoring increased background checks, closing the gun show loophole. We have 70% who want action on gun safety. So it's really an issue. It's a contentious issue among the Republican leadership. It's not a contentious issue in many ways with the public at large. We know what the public wants.
And that is an interesting point. Would you want to move on? And Joe, I want to start with you on this one because you have such a unique take to this. What we saw from President Trump this week in those visits to Dayton and to El Paso, and then the fallout since then, a lot of it coming with this photo, and we're just going to put it up for folks, of this is 2-month-old Paul, both of his parents. I mean, the story of his parents losing their lives. His mother was found laying on top of him. She tried to protect him. Her husband, who his family later found out on Sunday had died. Her husband, Andre, this little boy's father, died afterwards at the hospital. This boy's life, so tough. He was brought back by his family. So we want to point that out. His family was happy to be there. But the fact that this is the picture that the First Lady tweeted out, and we're seeing the president with the thumbs up sign, to say that there is some tone deafness here, it's not the first time. It's not new. It's not unexpected. But it doesn't make it okay, Joe. And I know that you have been in this situation where you have been with a president who has gone to comfort families after a shooting tragedy. I mean, just put it in perspective for us, what we're looking at, and then what you've experienced.
Yeah, it's really an unprecedented situation. I think we've become numb to the phenomena of Donald Trump, but it's worth exploring just for a second. I worked for President Clinton. We went through Columbine. We went through a mass shooting in Oregon, and one of the hardest things I ever had to do, and it was nothing compared to what the president had to do, was the families of the victims, those who had died, would gather in one case a school cafeteria, in another case a school gym, and they'd sit together with their families. And the president went family to family and heard their stories and put his arms around them and comforted them and did what a president is supposed to do. And this president, there's a big debate about whether he's capable of it or just doesn't want to do it. Who cares? It's his job. The video that they released out of Dayton was sickening to me. It looked like a campaign ad, and it was all about how Donald Trump was well received, not what Donald Trump brought to Dayton or what Donald Trump brought to El Paso. I don't think he met with any of the families of the victims who died. It is a terribly hard job to do. And I can tell you this, I got on Air Force One with President Clinton after these school shootings, and we didn't put the TV on and complain about politicians, and we didn't have Twitter, but we didn't go out and hold a press conference about how the president was being mistreated. The president was gutted. He had just gone through the absolute worst part of the job, and it stayed with him for days and weeks and months, and probably is still with him. So while we've seen it all from Trump, we really should understand that this is a fundamental failure of Donald Trump as president of the United States.
All right, go ahead. I heard a lot of sides there. Go ahead.
Yeah, not only of the president, because we've already established that he does not possess an empathy gene. This is not the first time that he's been this calloused and unaware and use, things to feed his own ego, putting that in front of any kind of unity or leadership. He just isn't capable. It's not who he is. But people that support him seem to be okay with that. They make excuses for it. Or you have someone like Tucker Carlson, who goes on air at Fox News and tries to diminish the problem of white supremacy that's on the rise in this country, and tell people that it's a hoax and it's a lie. Where, I wrote a piece for CNN.com that's up now about this, and I used the example actually of the family of the young boy, the young infant that the picture is involved in. I use the example of his sister, because there's other kids involved besides that 2-month-old. His sister Skylin, who's 5 years old, asked her family after she found out that both her parents had been gunned down, is he going to come and shoot me next? I mean, these are the kinds of heartbreaking stories that we're facing with these kinds of massacres, and the President of the United States is standing there in a photo with a thumbs up. I mean, these people owe they owe everyone that's ever been a victim of these kinds of shootings an apology, because they disrespect the memory of the people who've lost their lives by being so flippant about it, making campaign videos, complaining about crowd sizes. It's disgraceful. And the people who justify this, they're just as bad. Because I remember, because I was part of those Republican circles, when Republicans went after President Obama for not effectively calling out radical Islam, for going to play golf after a journalist had been beheaded, and he made comments about it, yet the President of the United States is yucking it up at his private golf club the evening after a massacre happened in El Paso. But no one seems to have a problem with it. I mean, this really is about what the soul of America is at stake, whether this is what the American people want as leadership, because that fundamental question that Joe Biden keeps pushing, I think, is a good one, because that's what we need to ask ourselves. In times like this, in times of crisis, is this the kind of leadership that we want? And I would think the answer is no.
Ro? Right, I think it's a truism that when we have any type of tragedy, it tends to bring out the best in people and the worst in people. And we saw some of the best in people in the response of the community of El Paso, where my family is all from. The people responding with compassion for the victims and love and support, and just trying to grapple with this trauma and move forward. And we see the worst in the president, and it does not bring me pleasure to say that, because he is the leader of this nation. We see the worst in this president, who can't show anything other than his own narcissism, and cannot stay away from this type of petty infighting for one day, and remove himself from the arguments and the attacks. So that to me is profoundly sad.
Rahul, Tara, Joe, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Difficult, scary moments at a Walmart. A heavily armed man wearing body armor confronted and arrested inside a store in Springfield, Missouri. He'd been walking around filming himself. Now, no shots were fired. No one was hurt. Of course, though, given what happened less than a week ago in El Paso, folks understandably on edge. CNN's Omar Jimenez has details live for us. Omar, I can't even imagine what was going through the minds of the folks in that store as they saw him.
Yeah, Eric, this man walks in tactical gear, has a rifle strapped to him as well, as you can see his picture there as well. You can understand why people were at the very least a little nervous. In fact, the manager then pulling the fire alarm, just trying to get people out of that store when he walked in. You mentioned it earlier. He was filming himself as he was pushing a cart through the Walmart. And then as those calls were coming through for a potential active shooter, because that's how police in Springfield, Missouri got this call, the man walked out and was detained by an armed firefighter, an off-duty firefighter, until police arrived just minutes later. But again, the good news is no one was hurt and no shots were fired in this. But I want to show you how police described responding to this scene, again, for what they thought was another active shooter inside a Walmart.
He walked in here heavily armed with body armor on, in military fatigues, and caused a great amount of panic inside the store. So he certainly had the capability and the potential to harm people. He was compliant with us, but his intent was not to cause peace or comfort to anybody that was in the business here. In fact, he's lucky he's alive still, to be honest.
And of course, this happened just 5 days after the shooting at the El Paso Walmart. And between this and what we saw earlier this week with the backfiring motorcycle in Times Square, it's very clear the events of what have happened this past weekend and beyond are still very much on people's minds here.
Yeah, you can see it in the face, Omar, of that police lieutenant. Hear it in his voice. He was so serious that this was something that was just beyond the bounds, given where the country is this week. Omar Jimenez, thank you very much. So the debate over what to do about guns in the United States being taken right to Mitch McConnell's doorstep by a 2020 presidential candidate, Tim Ryan. Congressman Ryan joins us from Kentucky next.
And now, a moment of wonder from Great Big Story. Made possible by Be Grim, empowering the world compassionately. A century ago, 100,000 tigers roamed the earth. Today, those numbers have declined to just about 4,000. But in the forests of eastern Thailand, conservationists have found new signs of hope for this iconic species.
We set up around 83 stations of cameras. Each station has 2 cameras. The general goal of setting up that camera trap grid was to estimate how many tigers are there, what potential is there for them to recover in that area. We discovered that we have a breeding population of tigers there. This is kind of the first evidence of breeding for at least, I think, a decade. It's a really amazing thing to have been able to see and to document.
For more stories like this, visit greatbigstory.com.
All new African Voices Changemakers. Create opportunities. Impact communities. Transform lives. This week, meet 2 Nigerians giving amputees a new lease on life.
I felt fulfilled seeing that I could help a child, and there's a platform that we could use to help.
African Voices Changemakers, Sunday on CNN.
This is the 100 Club, our look at companies that are 100 years old or older. Fragrance company Caswell Massey began in 1752 as an apothecary in Newport, Rhode Island, founded by a Scottish doctor named William Hunter. It is considered one of the oldest continuously running companies in American history.
So Caswell Massey is truly an American original. We are the oldest beauty brand in America by any stretch, and we were founded before the country was founded.
The signature No. 6 cologne debuted in 1772. Today, it is regarded as the first American fragrance and was a favorite of none other than George Washington himself.
Basically, George Washington was our first celebrity endorser for our company. He liked the fragrance enough that he bought it and he wore it.
We're headed south on the next CNN Business Traveler.
I haven't been back here to Mexico City in quite some time, so this is where we start.
From high-end to low cost.
You've created a whole new market where there wasn't one before.
Our most important competitors is the post market.
Plus the new way to combine work and play.
So we just want to help more people have this life-changing global experience. Ah, perfecto.
On the next CNN Business Traveler.
There, another shot.